Oh, terrific. Bonnie, good to see you. Good morning. It's my favorite part of the presentation, you guys, is seeing all these wonderful people who log in repeatedly, especially. So already know what to be aware of, you know.
What's pretty amazing is that you get to identify with every individual that logs in. And that may take you like 45 minutes, which makes our job easy.
Exactly. So awesome. Well, we're at time and it's somewhat of critical mass. So I'm going to just start off by welcoming everybody to today's program. This is part, as you know, of Dorsey's interactive dialogue series, which is a set of presentations really designed to be more about practical sides of business and the law, and to focus on the kinds of questions that executives have on the topics that we choose. And so today's going to be really an interesting one, and we're beta testing this program. I'm delighted to have some really exceptional presenters with me today. And a little bit about the program. So some logistics. Our presentation is going to be focused today on 4 pillars, and you'll see actually there's a bonus pillar of business success. The information and slides that we have today are going to be emailed out immediately after the program. So the slides were designed to kind of be both a guidepost for the discussion and also in some ways a checklist for some of the pillars that we'll be talking about. And so you'll be seeing that, and I really commend the information to you and the slides to you. Unlike many of our programs, this one is a pure business topic. Often we have a business and legal overlap. So with this one, we're not offering CLE. So this is a business only topic, and no CLE is associated with it. So I'm delighted to be joined today by 3 exceptional speakers from the GHJ and Advisors firm. And the topic came from a conversation that David Horwich and I had sitting in Seattle, although David resides elsewhere, as he'll describe, and talking about what are the things that you and your business practice see that lead to success or lack of success. And David said, I know just the thing. There are 4 things that always are a challenge that I go in and I find them and I fix them. I said, okay, wait, that's 4 problems, but what you're saying is the opposite out of the 4 pillars of success. He said, exactly. And so anyway, we got very excited about it. And so David, can you give us an overview of your own background and also more broadly the GHJ practice? And then Derrick and Don, if you could describe your own backgrounds as well.
Mike, thank you so much again. It was great meeting in Seattle and having that breakfast and watching the light bulbs go on both of our heads. And we're all 3 of us really delighted to be here. We appreciate the invitation. GHJ is a top 15 accounting and advisory firm based in Los Angeles. We actually expanded our footprint at the end of the year by acquiring a tax practice up in San Jose. And so now we're all of California centric. I spend a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest developing business for the practice. We have 3 legs to the stool. Don at one point in his career ran our audit and assurance practice. We have 50 some odd people in the assurance practice. We have a good 60 plus people in our tax practice, a very sophisticated tax practice, which does a lot of tax planning and works on a lot of transactional activity. We have an advisory practice where I reside. And in that advisory practice, there's 3 legs to the stool. There's a forensic litigation support practice. There is a transaction advisory service practice. Last year, we wrote 50 some odd quality of earnings reports. And then there's my practice. I'm a recovering investment banker, and I banked for 23 years, principally at a firm based out of San Francisco. We were the largest regional firm on the West Coast. I retired about 9 years ago from banking, and what I do now is I work with business owners to help them think about the future. The future might include a sale of the business. It might include just growth. It might include handing it to the family. A lot of business owners come to us saying, I've got this great plan in my head, and it just doesn't seem to be working out in reality, and I don't know why. And then we have Derrick's practice. Derrick runs our staffing practice. And with that, I'll hand it over to Don and then Derrick to talk about themselves.
Thanks, David. Mike, thanks. I appreciate you having us on board today. It's going to be a lot of fun. I promise you guys. Just super brief. I'm an auditor by background. I'm an audit partner at GHJ. I also lead our firm's food and beverage practice. I started the practice about 10 years ago. It's all walks of life and food and beverage, all privately held corporations, and all walks of life on the food and beverage side. It's become our firm's largest niche, and it's super exciting to see it grow. And it's ever expanding. It's food and beverage is extremely important to our practice, and it's a lot of fun to be involved in that particular niche. So Derrick,
Awesome.
I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Don, and Mike, thanks for having us. I am the practice leader for GHJ Search and Staffing, where we place candidates on a temporary project and permanent basis across a broad range of industries. And we have a pretty healthy client base in the food and beverage space. And our engagements include everything from a CFO all the way down through accounting clerks within organizations. And so I'm excited to be here today, and Mike, ready to dive on in.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And Derrick, as you know, I'm a recovering HR professional myself, so I'll be taking a lot of notes here today. I had noticed in your bio that you specialize in creative accounting searches, and I thought, okay, is that like for creative accounting? Is that what we're looking for? So, in any event, really delighted to have you as part of the program, and the three of us, or four of us, I guess, together. So one of the questions that we always ask is, why pick this topic? And I'll tell you, what really the spark that fired for me was that we have just gotten through one of the biggest flex moments, I think, that any business that we've ever had in business, at least in my career. And I've been through a lot of up cycles and a lot of down cycles in a long career. But this last one, man, it was a doozy. And what often happens with that is we find that gaps are revealed that we didn't know existed, that strength points are there that we hadn't seen in the past. And that as we're hopefully exiting, or at least entering a new phase of our world, I think focusing on those things is going to be really important to all of us in business. And while obviously the four of us work a lot in the food and beverage industry, a lot of the thought points here really relate to all businesses. And so could one of you describe why this topic is particularly important now in today's business environment?
Sure. Thank you, Mike. All of us have been around for a while, and we have seen thousands and thousands of companies over many decades of experience. And as you described at the outset of this, there's a number of things that turn up in all of these companies that require some activity to improve. So while there's different visions and plans, there's this commonality that runs through company successes. During the pandemic and the lockdowns, all of our clients had to be nimble. We had to be nimble as a firm, and all of our clients had to be nimble. Mike, you were describing earlier before we got on the call that you had an epiphany about the shutdowns were coming, and how is Dorsey going to pivot? So we've all had to get creative. We've all had to get very entrepreneurial. So we know what healthy organizations look like. We know what organizations that need improvement look like. And the three of us here, our daily work is helping our clients create value in their business. And we do so by applying these four pillars.
And one of the things that really I remarked on was that because of the work of working with many different companies, you kind of see people all solving the same problem, but with different approaches and different perspectives. And I think that that sometimes gives a really unique bird's eye view on how to handle the same business challenges that kind of everybody's facing, right?
Very true. In investment banking, the first thing we learn is that it's all about management, management, management. And then once you've dealt with that, it's about management. And so we look at management teams very carefully as we start getting involved with our clients. The projects that we typically work on are transaction preparation, especially these days. It would be almost malpractice not to advise a company to do some sort of transactional activity with the market as hot as it is. But when the market's not like this, it's a lot of growth planning. But it keeps coming back to who's the team and who are you working with, and is everybody going to get on the same page?
Which really leads us to the first pillar, which is the finance team and the finance team investment. And obviously, based on your backgrounds, all three of you, a focus is on the finance side of it. But why would the finance team investment be not only a pillar but the first pillar?
Well, I think that, David, if did you want me to? I'll just kick that off. I think underinvestment in your finance team can really make an negative impact on your organization. A strong finance team can grow your companies in ways that you probably never even imagined as a business. And while you may have a direction you want your business to go in, it's kind of hard to execute if the finance team is not on board, which can, sort of create practical steps and to execute the strategic plan. And so oftentimes what David and Don and I see is that many businesses underinvest in their finance team, and that can, sidetrack growth plans.
So
David?
I'm curious about the word investment and underinvestment. Because there are a lot of ways that you could invest in a finance team, either in the people, the number of people, the skill sets that you have, et cetera. So what do you mean by that word investment?
David, you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, sure. The investment it takes time for a guy to spool or a team to spool up. But once they do spool up, they're gonna provide data and information and reporting on a timely basis that's really important. I'll give a story here. I'm working with a client right now. It's a business service organization in Southern California. Super business. The owner has these amazing instincts about his company. He's flying blind. His monthly reporting is 45 to 75 days after the monthly close. He has no idea what he's doing in terms of his revenues, his earnings, his profitability. He just has nothing. He has nothing in front of him that would say to him, "Uh-oh, maybe something's going on here." We've helped him develop a number of metrics because he's in service business. Hourly rates that he bills his customers and number of hours per project, we think are a key metric. It's how we measure our business. And I'm sure, Mike, it's how you measure your business. So we look at that kind of data. We created this kind of data for him. He needed to invest in that. He doesn't have a CFO. He doesn't have a controller. In fact, he's outsourced his bookkeeping to a third party. And so he's kind of got nothing except really great instinct, which has helped him and served him well through all this time.
But I'll also add on to this is that I've seen too many times where a company will have a controller on board and they're outgrowing the capabilities of the controller. And you approach the company and you say, okay, it's time to invest in the CFO. And again, to tie on what you said, Mike, is the investment component. it's not a cost center. To bring somebody in who is the CFO, you view it not as a cost center, but a benefit in the future. It's going to help your company, not necessarily this year, or it will help this year. It's going to help in years to come. And that's the investment that I think that you're talking about. It's not a cost center, but rather it's the investment in your growth and strategy that every company needs to have.
You know, I have a couple of reactions and a question for Derrick on the difference between a controller and a CFO, because, you know, you're looking for the skill sets. But I am reminded of a comment my son, who was an accounting major, I asked him, you know, why were you an accounting major? He said, well, because it's the language of business. And I thought, okay, that's a great way of describing it. And then the second reaction is that there is a lag time between the feeling or instinct of we're busy and actually you know, collecting on whatever the thing is that you're manufacturing, selling, consulting services and the like. And there can be a real disconnect between those things because other factors, and I'd say particularly when we have so many family and other dynamics of COVID, that the calibration even of that instinct to how your business is actually doing is it's not as tight as it might have been in other times. So Derrick, when you look at, if you go out and you know, let's say that you're looking at a business, and you say, okay, we've got underinvestment in the finance team and need upgrade skill sets. What is the difference between a controller and a CFO?
The way I would describe a controller, they're much more tactical. They handle the month-end close, financial reporting packages. You know, they may do some, you know, obviously the nuts and bolts accounting, they own that. They own the nuts and bolts accounting. Very much tactical by nature, transactional, what has already happened versus a CFO is futuristic. What can we forecast for the future? They operate more as a strategic business partner, and they help tell the stories behind the numbers versus just reporting the numbers. Often controllers can put together the financial reporting packages, but because of lack of strategic, you know, chops, they can't tell the story behind, which helps them help their CEO and other business leaders navigate forward.
We also see CFOs as the liaison to outside capital. So if there's a debt component or an equity investor component, the CFO is going to be the guy that spends most of his time, most of the company's time with those outside constituents.
And what are the red flags that you tend to see?
If it takes longer than 15 days to close the books, that's a red flag. Are you operating to a budget? If you're not, that's a red flag. Can you talk to those outside constituencies? If you can't, that's a red flag. Are you facile with the numbers? Can you tell the story? Those are red flags. If you can't, those are red flags.
And Derrick, you were going to make a comment as I was asking my question.
Oh, I was just going to add, you know, as the business grows, your finance team must grow with it. And oftentimes, based on where you are in the life cycle of your business, certain skill sets may need to be right-sized and upskilled at different inflection points of your business.
And actually, that tees up really my next question, because I was thinking, how do you calibrate what's the right level? You know, is there a way that you have as a benchmark, a rule of thumb to say, okay, once you hit about X in revenues, then you should have a CFO, or is there a percentage of headcount that you tend to see by industries where if, for example, about X percent of the total staff would be in the finance department, so that someone could say, okay, we either have a lot more than that or less than that?
I would say, you know, as from Don and I talk about this and David frequently, usually around somewhere around the $30 million mark, going from lower middle market into, mid-market is when you really need to start thinking about a CFO because generally you've probably underinvested in your team as well as your systems. And so you need a different skill set to navigate forward. So Don, would you agree with that?
I do. And, anywhere between 30 to 50 million is what I call the Mendoza line, the baseline for a company to start looking at a CFO. Causes a little bit of angst when you hit that threshold for the first time. And, you're looking at a huge cost differential between a controller and a CFO. And Derrick, you may want to touch on that as to, what is a controller? What's the price or the cost of a controller? And then what's the cost of a CFO? Because you're going to the big leagues once you bring in a CFO that can do all the things that David talked about.
Right. So controllers, and a lot of this is based on revenue size, but generally speaking, a controller is probably around the 150 to 180 range in terms of base compensation. And then controllers are, 200, north of 200, just depending on the size and scope and skill set that you need. So there is there can be some anxiety regarding the upgrading of the CFO. And typically it's the upgrade of the skill set, but then it's also far too many companies, and Don and David probably see this far too often, where your company is operating on a QuickBooks platform with a large revenue stream of 50 million. And so it's just no way possible that that's accurate reporting and data. That's not a platform that's going to help you realize maximum potential of your organization.
So
yeah, we're going to
I
touch
can tell already that Derrick, one of your superpowers is getting us to the next slide. So, so because I was thinking about that, you got a chicken and egg problem here to some degree, right? The business is growing to a point where you feel like, okay, I need someone who has the ability to be outward facing, forecasting versus just reporting. But then obviously they can only do, act within the context of the information that's available to them. And that really leads to pillar number 2, which is the reporting systems and data analytics, which are kind of different things, right? So why are these so critical? Why would they be a pillar, and why would they be pillar number 2 after pillar number 1?
So, guys, I'll start on this one. And we're kind of starting to tie a lot of things together that we talked about earlier. When David said that it's a red flag when you see companies that report or that could produce their financial statements 30, 40 days, maybe even later after the month end or after the year end. 10 years ago, we would never be talking about what I call phase 2 of reporting. You're going to all companies will have a reporting system. Call it what it is. A lot of companies use QuickBooks. Companies now are evolving, but they didn't use anything beyond QuickBooks. And it's now table stakes to have a good reporting package, that you can produce financial statements within 5 days, 15 days after month end. Those are table stakes. Where companies are moving into now are data analytics, benchmarking, and you'll hear the words KPIs, key performance indicators, and that will actually set you apart from companies that are just trudging along to what I call successful companies. And I believe that you need to be able to take the data that's in your reporting and slice it and dice it many ways. And I look at it probably having 3 advantages to have data analytics or benchmarking or KPIs. Your KPIs will help you zero in on the key business objectives. There's no doubt that you could slice and dice your revenues and your sales by customers, by geographical areas, by the most successful customers, by the ones that unfortunately are the least successful, and you're spending so much time with those particular customers. So you zero in on key business objectives, but it also allows you to track progress. So you can actually see where you are now and where you need to be going forward. And then lastly, it provides insights into problems. By really keying on your KPIs, you can identify where your problems are and be able to avoid those and prevent those from happening. And what we're seeing now, at least in the food and beverage, is that a lot of food and beverage companies, and actually probably the majority of food and beverage, are struggling. They're struggling with supply chain issues, controlling their labor, and the rising costs of raw materials. I see that over and over again in a lot of my food and beverage clients. And you could track those. You could set up your metrics. You could set up your KPIs to track some of these issues, these key issues, and to help you deal with that and help you navigate these rough waters in those particular areas.
You know, it really illustrates too the importance of having it be real time. Because if you're getting, as David said, the reports closed by 45 days after the first day of a month, right? 15 days after the close of the month means 45 days from the beginning of it. And that's just not fast enough to be able to react when you have supply chain issues and the like, right?
100% agree. And I will tell you that, and David and I ran into this yesterday. We were meeting with a food and beverage company, and we were talking about their reporting. They were super excited about having they've upgraded their accounting staff, they've upgraded their reporting systems, and now they're trying to track their KPIs. And I asked them just a basic question: does your existing reporting system have the abilities to slice and dice your data and prepare or allow you to prepare KPIs on a real-time basis? And they were scratching their head and they didn't know the answer to that. So I encourage everybody on this webinar is to take a look at their existing system to see if their system can in fact track and produce KPIs on a real-time basis. More times than not, you'll find that it can do it, but just people don't have the time or haven't investigated whether or not it can be done.
I had a client example of this that worked really well. It was a retail grocer, cooperatively organized grocer, and they'd had real profitability challenges, and it turned around really quick. And so I called the general manager and I said, what'd you do? And he said, it was easy. I ran a report of every SKU we sold by gross margin. I sorted by that column, and anything that was lower than 0, we just stopped selling.
Right.
And it's like, oh, okay. If you have the information, you know how to use it. It can be very powerful if you can use it real time.
Well, and David, you may want to touch just super brief on the other example that I'm thinking of is we have a large ingredients company that we had, Mike, we had almost the exact same situation.
Yeah, I was definitely going to weigh in with that. We have a client. It's a several $100 million ingredients business, and they formed a joint venture a few years ago with a guy who really was steeped in the knowledge of an ancillary but related commodity to trade. And within 18 months, they had built this thing up to 55 million revenues. But the owners came to us and said, this thing's at 55 million in revenues. It's making about $1 million. And we've drawn almost, $14 million, Don, I think, on their line of credit. And they were like, this doesn't make any sense. And so we said, well, okay, sort the revenues by customer, by margin. And the bottom third, I believe, of number of of customers, not of number of transactions, but the bottom third of customers were less than 0. They were actually losing money on the trade. And so we said, well, stop doing that. And on a pro forma basis, and they implemented the plan on a pro forma basis, they were going to save almost $2.5 million. I mean, it was a big, big turnaround. And so, for a small investment and a little bit of consulting and advisory, they got a great ROI on asking the right questions of us.
When you touch, Mike, you touch on just a couple KPIs or benchmarking. Depending upon what the focus is for the company, you can really choose what's important for you, what are important metrics for the company. So whether it's labor, trying to automate more, you could track your repairs and maintenance, you could track your throughput, you could track labor as a percentage of revenues, you could track IT spending if IT is a strategic focus for you. So there's a lot of different ways. It's easy to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to track gross profit, I'm going to track operating income, or I'm going to track days, you know, inventory turn or days of average days collection on receivables. But where you really can benefit your KPIs and your dashboard reporting, and I always advise companies to have anywhere between 5 to 8. Don't overload your system with a zillion, with 4 pages of dashboard reporting. Just pick the 4 or 5 that are key to you, strategic to you, and things that you can look at on a daily basis, on a real-time basis.
So a couple of observations and then a question. One is that I'm thinking about trigger points. When do I pick up the phone if I'm a business professional and say, okay, I should reach out to the team here. I might need to upgrade the skill set in the finance department. And this topic here is also a trigger point, it would seem to me, because you're talking now about the kind of analytics that you'd expect from a CFO, but not necessarily from a controller. To Derrick's point, that they're really looking behind the information and numbers and doing forecasting and the like. And then second is that if you're at the point where you feel like the software that you're using is just not up to the task that you need it for, that means you either need to upgrade the software or upgrade the people who are, the skill sets of the people who are working within it. And so those would both be, I think, trigger points to reach out and say, okay, let's look at pillar number 1 also. So then my question is about the information, because you made a point, Don, about this is obviously not a comprehensive list. Even the last one says many others, and it's going to be modified based on the unique attributes of a particular company, what KPIs or benchmarks you're looking for.
Right.
But then part of my question is, what's the recommended frequency and distribution of that information? And I say this as a recipient sometimes myself of data information that's set up on automated, it's going to go to mic level, and it can become overwhelming, and the utility of it is lost over time, that kind of thing. So what do you recommend as far as that's concerned?
There are certain KPIs, dashboard items that you want to see on a daily basis. Whatever that is, if you want to see cash on hand, if you want to see your labor rate on that day's production, there are things that you need to see on a daily basis. There are things that you can do on a weekly or even on a monthly. I don't advise you going that much on a monthly unless you do comparative data. I'm comparing this month with last month to last year at this time. You could do that on a monthly basis, but so it all depends, but you want a couple on a daily, couple on a weekly, and then on a monthly. What's super important that we didn't touch on is that you've got to be able to train your staff. You can't just throw out these dashboards and KPIs and never look at it again. You have to really train, and it may not only be for the CFO or the executive, but for example, your head of operation will definitely have their own KPIs focused on the operation, but you have to train, and everybody's got to buy in to use them and to manage their company based upon the results of the KPIs.
One of the observations on KPIs that I've always had is that they become self-fulfilling prophecies in a way. Things we kind of throw around in the HR world, that what you measure gets achieved, that kind of thing. No one wants to be below average, but then it can lead to behaviors and culture change, which can increase turnover. So it's, I think, as you said, Don, really looking at what you're measuring. Is it right now? For example, what we're measuring daily might change in 3 months based on changing dynamics in the industry or in our business. So good advice.
Good data, Mike, also will provide forward-looking indicators. And will spot problems and trends that are coming at you, problems and opportunities from trends that are coming at you. And no one wants to react. Everyone wants to proact. And the best way to proact is have the data in front of you that is sending signals that one can listen to. really the way I look at data is, if I were investing in this business, what are the things that I would want to look at? What are the important unit economics? What are the important margin economics? What is driving this business that is going to lead me as an outsider to invest in this company? And I'm going to tie this one back to the first pillar, which is the acid test for us is when a client hires us, the first thing we do is we send over a reasonably comprehensive, but not overwhelming, we hope not overwhelming, diligence request list of data that we want to start reviewing. And I will tell you, Mike, 9 times out of 10, it can take a month before we start seeing anything. And that will tell you, that tells you right there that your finance team is not well organized and that you don't have the data.
It's an interesting point where you mentioned at the very beginning, we're seeing a lot of merger and acquisition activity. Your firm's done a lot of quality of earnings assessments in the last 12 and 24 months. That's going to continue in 2022 for sure. And even if you're not looking for an investment, the same kinds of metrics that are being reviewed are still the ones that are going to move your business forward. So you ought to be looking at them either way.
Well, that's why I said at the very beginning, our whole shtick is all about creating value in our companies, whether you go to market or not.
So one of the other 9 times out of 10 that really shocked me, David, when we had our first conversation on the pillars, was the absence of a strategic plan at all. Like, what's the barn we're shooting at here? And so why is that a pillar, kind of stating the obvious, and why put it at number 3?
So I ask my clients or prospective clients, as you're going to market, would you rather go to market with a plan or not with a plan? It's a tautological question. Of course you want to go to market with a plan. Your competitors are going to market with a plan and they're going to beat you every time because they do have a plan. For us, a plan really is, we start asking questions like, what's a good customer? And then we ask, what's a bad customer? How many owners and salespeople have ever taken a step back and said, well, what's a bad customer? We want to know what a bad customer is. We want our clients to know what a bad customer is. And what we do is we create a box, and the box is good customers inside the box, customers we don't want outside the box. Why is that important? Because if you know what your good customers are looking like, you direct your resources in that direction. If there's a customer that comes along that might not fit your box, but you want to chase it anyway for some other reason, like it's a big customer, it's a branded customer, it's a well-known name, there are maybe some other reason to want to have that customer, well, you change your plan for that. But really what we want our clients to do, because everybody is resource constrained, we want our clients focused on what is a good customer. Once you've got that good customer, then you can design your organization around that.
And really that ends up folding back into a key performance indicator, right?
Yeah.
So which comes first here? Is it better to put the focus on the strategic plan and then back out the KPIs from there? Is it better to establish your performance indicators first and then look at that? Do you go back and forth between those? Is there any kind of recommended process?
I think you use them both at the same time. And as an example, I was super excited when David and I had our conversation with a food client the other day, where they said, okay, they've got their accounting system, they got the people on board, and they have all these ideas in their head popping up, and we want to do this, we want to do this, and we finally said, okay, you've got everything you need set up for a great strategic plan. Now let's strategize and work on that. You can have your plan in place and you set your metrics, you set your KPIs around where you want to go in the future and what your desires and what you're trying to achieve. So I think you almost have to have them all at the same time. David or Derrick may have a different opinion, but I think that they're complementary of each other.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of what we do is we do discovery to start with. We want to know everything about our client before we sit everybody in a room and start planning. And so our discovery process is we ask a bunch of financial questions. We ask about a bunch of business questions. We start analyzing the data. We do interviews with all the senior team. We do a one-on-one interview process with each of the members of the senior team. Because what we want to do is we want to go learn the good, the bad, and the ugly of each organization. And if we talk to enough people, we're going to triangulate on the truth, because every individual team member is a human being and they have their own agendas. And if we talk to enough folks, we're going to find out what's really going on at the company from a qualitative perspective. So we take that qualitative, we take that quantitative information, and then we can then sit down with everybody and then start high level. What's a good customer? What's a bad customer? How do we develop business? How do we not develop business? How do we, how are we going about managing the company? What's important? What's not important? And a lot of this process also, getting back, and I'm kind of being your straight man here, Mike, is getting to who's good, who on this team knows what they're doing, who on this team is the team.
I'm curious from an HR perspective how deep you go on this question, because I find sometimes the real knowledge is far below the executive group. Sorry, executives that are listening. But so Derrick, do you have recommendations from that perspective, from an HR perspective?
I would think that there's two different, I guess, approaches of, I would say if you can use a top-down or bottom-up combination, hybrid model, when you're focused on your strategic plan, like just about everything in life, there's in business and in life, there's trade-offs to both to consider. So I've seen many companies using a hybrid approach, thoughtfully combining the two orientations to sort of derive the best value for each. So in my view, companies need a top-down aspect because of the company's strategic plan, which provides the roadmap for the entire organization. And then companies also need to leverage the bottom-up approach, because that's the horsepower that generates the company's revenue and profits and resides in those respective business units. And to sort of mix metaphors, it's at the level where a company's rubber meets the road to give the plans traction.
You know, you're putting in a slightly different way the adage I've heard, which is no strategic plan can survive culture.
Exactly.
So anyway, culture always wins. And you listed out also some strategies, and I just want to present those to the audience to some degree as usable checklists and very helpful ways of approaching how to think about your business. And you made a comment, David, about one company and they had all these different things, you know, and really resonated with me because I've actually been tested as having a high degree of goal diffusion, meaning that I want to do everything all the time immediately and, you know, and the like. So obviously focus is more helpful and more valuable. And so being aware that that's a tendency of mine has helped me a lot in my own career and would help and does help businesses getting focused like we have with food and beverage being one of the 6 industry focuses of the firm. So, and I love this question here about, you know, who do you consider to be good customers? I had a client once who in 08, 09 had a real pivot and substantial increase in their business. It was a temporary staffing firm. And one of the things they did was they looked at the customers that just weren't acting like they got value from the service and said, you know, it's been real. Here's another alternative for you. And, you know, literally removed some of their customer base during the downturn, which one would think is a very challenging thing, but from their perspective was necessary because then they could devote their resources and time to the customers that were getting value and that they wanted to retain. And then you've listed as well for retail businesses strategies for them. And just briefly on those two slides, how do you come up with benchmarks for what is a good customer or a good part of your strategic plan?
What we do is we again go by, we look at P by Q kind of information. We want to know pricing history. We want to know where pricing is going. We want to know quantity data as well, unit data. I'll give a good example of a food and beverage customer, a food processor, for example, that's selling into a grocery store. The kinds of things that we want to know about are things like, how many store doors are you in? What's been the historical growth rate within each store door? How are you going to go about getting more store doors? Is it going to come in lumps because you pick off a brand? Is it going to come by going to each general manager of each individual grocery store and talking to them? How's it going to happen? So the plan really then takes life because we create action steps as to, okay, here's what the plan is. And Mike, I really resonated with your focus comment. We don't want our clients doing too many things. We want our clients to really focus on 2 or 3 things that they can really dive into and do very well. And are the lowest hanging fruit that are going to create the highest value in the shortest period of time. So the action steps then are the tactics that are used to execute the plan. We meet monthly with our client. Once the plan's put in place, we tend to meet monthly with our clients and act as an outside board of advisors, or sometimes, as we like to joke, adult supervision, and watch what's going on. Measure, look with a cold eye, because we're not in the business every day. We're bringing perspective, and the cold eye and the perspective is why did things happen last month the way they did, good, bad, or otherwise. And is there an opportunity within what happened last month that we can capitalize in, or is there a risk here that is starting to come to the fore? As we said here on the slide, it's like going to war. Everything changes as soon as you start to execute on the plan, because your competitors get a say, and the world is going to change. The world is changing right now. I don't think anybody on this call knows how inflation is going to play into their strategic plan this coming year, but we all know it's here, and we all know it's going to have an impact. And what we're all trying to figure out is, how much of an impact is it going to have, and what can we do?
Which leads us to some degree to a feedback loop and the entire team buy-in. And Derrick, you had mentioned before about how to even develop the strategic plan from top down or bottom up, or some combination, and you were advocating for a combination of those, I think. And so why would Pillar 4 be entire team buy-in? And as importantly, how do you achieve that?
Well, in the buy-in, I think involving everyone's regarding the mission, so that there's buy-in at all levels within the firm, because they're going to be responsible for the execution of the steps in the plan. And so I think it's important to have an understanding of the entire team, that here's the plan and here's how everybody needs to execute and navigate forward. If there's a team members that are on board with the plan, there's a good chance that if they're not on board, it may fail. If everyone doesn't have the why, how their impact will make the organization navigate forward.
And each person effectively having a role to play that's clear as to their component of it. And, you know, it's interesting. I was reflecting, David, on your comment with the last slide that we use in business a lot of times the word accountability. And I've taken over the last couple of years to changing the language to, instead of accountability, I talk about accounting, taking an account, which should be as emotional as an Excel spreadsheet, right? In other words, it just is what it is. Let's take a look at it. See, did we execute well? Did we not execute well? If we didn't execute well, what we do better in the future? If we did execute well, what can we do more of that in the future? That kind of a thing, rather than necessarily a kind of blame storm, as we sometimes call it. And I think that I was really resonated with the 3 clarifies on this slide. So can one of the 3 of you talk about what those clarifies are and why they're so important?
Yeah, I mean, this, I'll start with this one. I loved that little, the 3, what I call the 3 C's, or the 3 clarifies. Everybody, as Derrick said, everybody has different roles. And if you just say, okay, it's kind of like the little slide that you have everybody, you know, 1, 2, 3, you know, let's go team. It's great, but everybody, there needs to be expectation of the management team, and everybody has their own role to fill. It may be dictated by the CEO, who's the visionary, but everybody has a specific role to play. And with respect to the second clarify, there needs to be a clarification of the expectations around collaboration. We are all collaborating for the goal of the organization. And if everybody's not on the same page for collaboration, then it would just a success, or a strategic plan will not be successful. So you need to make sure that you clarify the expectations, what everybody what the ultimate goal is on that. And the last clarify is who is in charge, who's going to make the final decision. We need to make sure that that's clarified in the strategic plan. Can everybody just make a decision, or is it centralized, or is it basic, or is it the department head that's going to make a decision? So you can't have everybody trying to make a decision, otherwise it creates chaos. So you have to clarify that. So I don't know if David or Derrick, you guys, what I call the 3 Ds. So while we have the 3 Cs, we've got the 3 Ds over here. So I don't know if David or Derrick, you guys have a comment on just adding to the clarifying.
Just an overall general comment. Everybody has a role to play. Everybody should know what their role is, and everybody should also expect that the rest of their team is going to hold them accountable to it, or accounting to it, to use Mike's phrase. But that makes a good culture. I mean, if everybody is in the same boat, rowing at the same time, at the same speed, you're going to get to where you want to go.
You may not agree. A person or an individual may not agree to certain things in the vision, but you've got to have buy-in on the overall strategic plan. And that makes us for a successful plan.
It's also,
and I'm interested in how you find folks. So the one for me of the 3, first and third, to some degree is embedded in the job title. If I'm the vice president of marketing, or if I'm the chief financial officer, then the title itself says a little bit about what's the expectation, what's my decision-making authority. But the collaboration piece is so critical, and it's such an incredibly soft skill. And so, you know, if Derrick, could you talk to how do you find that when you go out and you're looking for somebody who's going to be the right senior person, either controller or CFO for a company, how do you find someone who's going to understand that their job is to move the company forward, not just to present the information to the sales and marketing team and then wash their hands of it?
Well, generally what happens is, you know, especially from a CFO perspective. They go into the company and they know that what the charter is, because when we started that engagement, we're like, we need to cross-functionally, everyone needs to understand the numbers as relates to their departments, and that information needs to that messaging needs to cascade down so that the company strategic plan can move forward. And so I think that it's collaborative, but it's also holding everyone to their promise after the strategic vision has been launched. And, typically the CFO or head of finance will have to, sort of hold everyone to their promise of meeting whatever target or understanding what those variances are and get them corrected.
I had a client that did such a fascinating thing in this area in the very early stage of the pandemic that it bears repeating because I've used this example in other interactive dialogues. But what he did is he looked at they're in the restaurant business and they could tell that there were going to be some restrictions. And so they started off by bringing everybody together, all the senior people together in a room, and said, what are the restrictions that we anticipate having with our business? And what are those constraints basically? And they wrote them all on a list. And then each constraint got a kind of team leader for that. And they developed a plan working with the other people for that, for what's going to happen when restaurants close, what's going to happen when we can only do delivery in certain ways, such like that. And then as those business constraints happened, the roles shifted. So once the business constraint moved from constraint 1 to constraint 2, now constraint 2 was the team leader. And whereas constraint 1 had been the team leader until that point, now they're there in a support role. And so I thought having that example of in a dynamic situation, and in particular, Lord willing, we don't have another pandemic, but there's always going to be some crisis in a business, some opportunity that you want to exploit. And having it be clear in that way was, I thought, just such an interesting thing because it was not dependent on the job title. The CFO was responsible for handling certain business outcomes where they were the business leader at that point and they were up to the task for doing it.
It's I think collaboration, and we say that around GHJ often, is the foundation for success. I mean, at all levels, it's vitally important that collaborate. I mean, you can innovate through collaboration. You can problem solve through collaboration. And so there's a tremendous upside potential when you collaborate through all levels within the firm.
And then at the same time, having the clarity of expectations is really important because you avoid what I call T-ball management. T-ball meaning, the ball goes to the outfield and everyone races off the base to get the ball. And then they realize, wait, there's no one covering bases anymore.
Right.
We've all seen examples of that. So then what's missing? Any fifth pillars? And David, you alluded to several of these already, but can you briefly describe?
Yeah, without this sounding like a commercial, really, we think surrounding yourself with excellent advisors, most importantly, they offer you perspective. The perspective, you're in your business day to day and you got your blinders on, and those blinders are well-founded. They keep you focused, they keep you working. Having outside perspective will call attention to things that you're not seeing. My favorite question of a client when I come in and start talking with them is, after I've listened for a little while, is my favorite question is, well, why are you doing it that way? And we all on this call, we all know the answer to that. 100% of the time, we've always done it that way. Well, we've always done it that way is not a good answer. And so we want our clients to be slightly uncomfortable because that challenges them. That challenges them to be better. And at the end of the day, we want our clients to be better. Where do you find them? Trusted advisors, legal counsel, and accounting advice tends to be where people who've been around and seen a lot of stuff can offer perspective.
There's a whole industry now around executive coaching for the CEO level or CFO level. And I find that I sometimes say that if you know what a rock cairn is, it's a series of rocks stacked up, and business is like that to some degree. You have the big rock of the business and the big rock of the owner, or the shareholders, and right in between is this little thin thing called the CEO and the CFO, and they're very alone, being crushed by two opposing forces a lot of the time. And so many companies look to that, even for high-performing executives, but so they have an external person to just bounce ideas off of and get that perspective, or having advisory boards and the like, which can, for a very minimal cost, be a really high return on that investment. So my final question is always, what are the 5 things that participants can do today to improve their business? And so to any of you, why were these the 6, I guess, more than 5 plus a bonus, and in that particular order?
Well, as we've said many times here, the management team is the most important thing in any business. As investors and outside capital always bet on teams, and if they are betting on the team, you should be betting on your team. You as an owner should be betting on your team. What are the few strategic issues that are important, and these should always be looked at. It's a holistic environment, and it's ever changing. Make sure your reporting is good, because it will identify, if it's really good, it will identify problems before they arise, and it will identify opportunities as well. Meet regularly with your senior team. We advocate weekly meetings. If it's Monday morning, you talk about what happened last week. Where did you succeed? What challenges did you surface? You set the goals for the team for the coming week, and everybody in the meeting, if they're the right people, they're going to be hearing things in the environment that may be risks or opportunities that the rest of the team might not be aware of. Good example, Don and I were coming back from our meeting yesterday, and we were talking about one of our go-to investment bankers that had been sold last week. Don was unaware of it. He just didn't get the email. And so just everybody being aware of what's going on. Keep changing. Don't be comfortable. Don't ever have me ask you the question, why do you do it that way? Why are you doing it that way? That's not a good question to be asked. And then make sure you're being held accountable. Set goals, set plans. They tend to take the form of something in numbers, and understand why you've not met that plan, either on the upside or on the downside. What are the variances and why they happen?
Don, first to you, and then Derrick. What are your comments in regards to the top 5 things?
I actually like number 6, even though that's a bonus one. Just hold yourselves accountable. You can have all the strategic planning you want, and you could do it year after year after year. If nobody holds you accountable, or if you don't hold others or yourself or others accountable, you're not going to accomplish what you need to do. And so I actually put number 6. I would put that as number 1. Hold yourself.
It's interesting. As I was thinking in your comment, I've read now the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, 8 times, right? More than once per habit. And habit number 1 is proactivity. It's do the thing you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it.
Yeah.
Live up to your own self-promise. So in any event, Derrick?
I would just echo what Don said. I mean, that to me was like when Don and I and David, when the Triple D team met, that was one of the things we all agreed to that was important, which is why we added it as a 6th. But it actually should be probably number 1.
Fantastic. Great. Well, just such great information. Thank you so much for today's presentation. Again, for those who are listening in, if you have any questions specific to the panelists, Here's their contact information. I encourage you to reach out. And also, you'll be receiving a copy of the slides in the email following the presentation. And so I really commend to you the slides, in particular, those that are really designed as a checklist for you in helping advance your business. So with that, thank you, David, for taking me up on my crazy idea. Thank you, Derrick and Don, for being willing to participate as well. And thank you to everybody listening in for this interactive dialogue. We encourage you to participate in others in the future as well. And in the information will also be, short bios for each of the presenters. So with that, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.